All right, so welcome everyone. This is our virtual meetup for Agile Nova. I'm happy to have Paul Booz with us today and presenting a topic on Agile leadership. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Salah. Really happy to be here. First of all, we're going to have some exercises. You will need to have a browser available for a short period of time here in the beginning, and you'll want some paper and pencil or pen to do some jotting down. And then we'll be doing some debriefs along the way through the chat session. And so Salah will be helping me sort of monitor chat. That way we're not just having everybody stepping on each other. We can kind of like look at the chat and then read through that. So, and so I might be able to keep up. I was able to do it the last time, but there may be times where it could get might get a little behind, and I'll need your help with that. So, all right. Well, let's get this kicked off. So, first of all, let's go to Menti.com and enter code 236101 because not everybody actually said their role, so it's kind of interesting to see who's in the audience.
I am, but I can't do it right now. I'm driving to home.
Okay, yeah, don't do that. I would recommend not doing that. And seeing the results is probably not a good idea. There's probably less cars on the road for you to run into. I would prefer not to hear like. All right. So it looks like most people are sort of filling a coach or scrum master role. We have a few managers, a few folks that are other. Great. Cool. So this is going to be our agenda today. You can ignore the Slack channel thing because I was looking at setting up a Slack channel that would be around this, but decided against it. So I'm going to help define servant leadership. I'll be using Greenleaf's definition if you're not familiar with Robert Greenleaf. I'll talk a little bit about where some differences are, and then we're going to go into an exercise about what has frustrated you, or if you are a coach or a scrum master or somebody that's not a manager, maybe what you've seen frustrating managers. And then we'll go into a little bit of why managers resist servant leadership. And I won't say all of them do. Some of them buy into it really quickly. But really, we're not going to come along and say, hey, manager that's not buying into servant leadership, we're going to fire you. That usually doesn't happen. So what we want to do is try to figure out a way of doing that. So we're going to talk about then going into how we enrich management to have that happen. We'll get in some specifics on delegation a little bit toward the end with another exercise. There'll be some other exercises smattered in, and we'll see how we can move from frustrations to enrichment as a closing exercise, and then we'll just do a little close. And I'll make sure you have my contact information if you want to get in touch with me later. All right. So this is Robert Greenleaf's definition of servant leadership if you haven't seen it before. I really like it. I mean, it's a really clear, concise definition, and he also contrasts it to what other leaders are that are not servant leaders. So when we look at, these are the key words. It begins with the natural feeling to serve first. So your desire is to serve, and it just happens that you come into doing that through leadership. And so that's just bringing you this spot, an aspiration. But most people, particularly people that have been, managers coming up through traditional roles and stuff like that, they're sort of programmed to be a leader first, all right? Their first instinct is I want to lead, not necessarily serve others. So that's a little bit of a contrast. But that's something we've got to live with. So I really want to help folks that are trying to make this transition and find ways of making that a little bit easier for them. So we're going to start off with an exercise here. We want to record what's frustrating people as managers, or if they've been coaches or scrum masters, what they've seen. However, what I want you to focus in on is not the emotional content, right? That the frustration is kind of apparent, right? But what are we seeing are the tasks that are new and different that are being thrown at these folks, or being thrown at you if you're a manager that's giving you this frustration. And might I say, sometimes you get coached for these. So we want you to think a little bit about what you're being coached at. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I just want you to write down these tasks that you're either being told to do or maybe ones you're being told not to do anymore that sort of frustrate you as a manager, or what you've seen expressed by other managers. All right, so you have 3 minutes. I'm still doing an old-fashioned timer over here to the. Okay, and that's time. So, all right, let's do a debrief. So let's go into the chat room. Let me get this closed here. And let's look forward. If somebody wants to just start writing down what they found as a activity that they're being asked to do or not to do that is really frustrating to them, just put that to everyone. And if if you happen to be a manager and it's coached at you, go ahead and put an asterisk. Or if you're coaching it to someone, if you're a coach, then go ahead and put an asterisk. That's probably another thing. Let's see what we get. Let's see what kind of theme we might get. T-shirts getting carved in stone. We're just telling them what to do. Yep. Supporting self-organizing teams, letting the team self-organize, manage their own work. Yep. Listening first rather than taking command. Yep. Okay. Not allowed to task or direct work. Yep. Changing their leadership style. Yeah. Your leadership style just sucks, man. Short-term results. Yep. Quick short-term results. Calling people out versus trusting the team. Yep. Losing authority. Keeping accountability. That's a good one. Reliance on metrics. Yep. No longer allowed to say get X done by such and such. Yeah. And trying to figure out how to get metrics. My team just won't give them to me. Cool. So I think that gives us a good start to work with. Let me get back. Teams unwillingness to divide a huge story. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get back. Take a look at some themes. So from a theme perspective, what I've found that's generally happening. So this is the habit loop from Charles Duhigg, from his book, The Power of Habit. And I find this is kind of like universal of what's happening here. So we have all these things of what managers used to do, and they're either being told not to do them anymore or start doing something else. So I've got this cue of being reminded that I'm a manager, or that I'm a habit of doing certain tasks that are expected of you. Those are management tasks I've been brought up, perhaps trained, perhaps I've been doing them for a very long time because I've been a manager for a very long time. Maybe I'm an exec now. And that's giving me this identity as a manager. So that whole identity, just there. And so then I'll get another cue that will remind me that I'm a manager. And again, I'll fall into that habit of having expected tasks that I'm expected to do. Maybe it's querying the team on status or something like that. And then again, that reinforces my identity as a manager. And this, of course, sets up a little bit of a craving because that identity is a reward to some degree, right? So that's Charles Duhigg talks about this cue, habit, reward, creating a craving cycle. And so anytime I want that reward, I actually start creating my own cues so I can fire off the habit myself, because that gives me a reinforcement. And so that's the kind of thing that starts fighting when you're talking about servant leadership. Now, when we start doing that, we start talking about expected servant tasks. So if I'm a coach and I come in and say, hey, these are the tasks that I really want you to do as a servant leader, or things I don't want you to do, right? Maybe I want you to support all the team decisions, or like that all might be sort of implied, but you're saying support the team's decisions. You don't want to reverse them, or perhaps, get out of the team's way, or just go take care of impediments. I'm actually asking them to create a new identity as a servant manager, essentially, or a servant leader, if you want to call it that way. But they have this thing being reminded that they're a manager, but I am trying to say, no, you've got a new identity. So that cue you're getting, you have to have this new identity as your reward, and you've got to pick up these new tasks. And Charles Duhigg writes about this as, now I'm creating a new habit loop but I haven't really gotten rid of the old habit loop. They still have the same queue coming up that has them to do expected tasks, especially if they have another manager above them, and that still treats them as being a regular manager. So these two loops start competing against each other, and the old loop, because it's been around longer, is generally going to win, because that's got the craving cycle going much longer than the new one will. So what we really want to do is we want to nix that, right? We don't want to be creating competing loops. That doesn't mean we don't want the manager to be doing servant leadership like things, but we need to put it in different terms. So why don't we call them new management tasks? They're still managers. We just have new tasks we're dumping on you. And maybe we'll take some old tasks away, but the main thing is we want you to get new ones. So rather than just say support all of the team's decisions, perhaps one of the examples we could change it to is delegating decisions. So they don't have to give up everything, but they can do delegation to create a way of actually giving some support for the decisions that are being made by the team, and other ones they may still want to hold on for themselves. That way you're not competing against the identity they've been building up. And management adds new tasks all the time and takes away old tasks. It's not that that doesn't happen. It's just they generally keep it within a construct of still keeping them the identity of the person as a manager. They still have final authority. They still have some say to come in and tell people. But we don't really want that, but we need to get the right types of tasks. So what are these new types of tasks? Well, we're going to talk about these things in the bullet points, designing jobs. And we're not talking about like position descriptions or something. We're talking about actually helping people have jobs that are well designed, that grow their skills and increase their work toward their passion. That's one of the things that we can do to enrich a manager's job. Another one is that managers quite often go off and they don't think about observing the work system any longer. We've especially in knowledge work and with servant leadership in some cases, we've kind of told them, just go away for a while, right? The team will figure it out. But there's still a lot of value for them observing the work system that either the team is having or what's occurring in between teams. In order to do that effectively, we want them to demonstrate curiosity. So that's going to be another thing we'll chat a little bit about. They're going to uncover problems by observing the work system and demonstrating curiosity. So what better is to have them start resolving emerging problems proactively, get them working ahead of the teams, solving some of their problems so the teams don't have to deal with it. Now, teams actually need problems. They're actually working to try to solve a problem. When you give them a need that needs to be fulfilled, like a product to be developed, they're trying to solve a problem for somebody, right, to fulfill that need. So we want to design good problems for the teams to solve. And then like we've mentioned before, we want to delineate delegated authority clearly so that they know the boundaries of what the team can do and where they should be involving the manager. So that way we have sort of a spectrum that we'll be working in. And Chris Argyris writes about this in Integrating the Individual and Organization. It's a fairly old book. These thoughts have been around for a long time, like since the 60s or so. So it's just interesting that it's the Agile movement's kind of pushing a lot of this stuff toward the forefront. So we want to enrich people's jobs. Some of these, like designing jobs, is about enriching workers' jobs, but that's something a manager can do, and therefore it's enriching their job as well. All right, so let's talk about unlocking motivation through this job design. So on the left-hand side is what we really desire. We're in knowledge work. We're not talking factory piecework or anything. We're talking knowledge work. In order to be effective at that, we need people to have high internal work motivation, what's termed frequently intrinsic motivation. We want to unlock that passion that goes along with that. To do that, there are 3 psychological states people need to have. They need to experience meaningfulness with their work. They need to experience responsibility for the outcomes of their work. And they need to have knowledge of the actual results of the work activities that they're getting. And to do that, starting with the bottom one, you need feedback from your job. Without feedback, you don't know what the actual results and whether that's actually getting you where you want to be going. This is pretty much equivalent to how you obtain mastery. Daniel Pink drive perspective. To get to know where your responsibility for the outcomes are, you need to have autonomy. You need to have some amount of autonomy that says, this is how I do my job and how I get to work with it. If I don't have any autonomy whatsoever, then whatever happens was the responsibility of somebody else. I can just write it off to somebody else. So when, we come in and start telling somebody in micromanaging, right, that is pretty much taking away autonomy. That person can just follow those instructions to the nth degree if they're okay with that. Otherwise, they'll probably leave. And so therefore, we wind up with them having no autonomy. And so we want to be able to craft jobs that have autonomy. And again, that's a direct relationship with Daniel Pink. Then meaningfulness comes from three different things. One is task significance. That's sort of equivalent to Daniel Pink's purpose. That's how important is this task to a user or somebody out in the community? Is it fulfilling a particular need for a customer? That's the task significance. The next thing is, how well do I identify with that task? I could identify with Java programming, but that then may not have the task significance. Well, what makes that meaningful per se, right? But I might identify also with a story or an epic, right? I want to see that through because I really feel that's valuable and I can see making that work, perhaps with Java or something else, as well as I can see the significance because I can see the business value. And then the third thing that gets into getting meaningful is being able to do a little bit of variety in my skills, not just doing Java programming, but maybe learning and growing my skills maybe in analysis or test engineering, or maybe, infrastructure as code, or tweaking for performance, or all sorts of different things. So those three, which might intermix a little different and can change over time, kind of help you experience meaningfuls. Some people may equate more to task identity. Other ones may equate more to task significance. But there are going to be some balance in all three of these. All right. Moving on. So now people don't work by themselves. They work usually in teams or in groups at least. So what are the elements that make up for this work group effectiveness? Well, one is the features we just talked about on the right-hand side, all those job design features. So task significance, skill variety, autonomy, task, now I'm going to have to do it by memory. Definitely getting feedback, and also the task significance. There we go. So all of those are going to feed into the job design features. But there are two other feature sets: organizational context and interpersonal process. And so that prior model that I was showing you that goes a little bit beyond drive comes from Oldman and Hackman. They have a book on work redesign, which gets into this. And this is where they start looking at work redesign in the idea of bringing in organizational and context. So we have rewards and objectives for good performance, availability of task-relevant training and consultation, and clarity of tasks and constraints. These are the three things that give you organizational context. And they each go into a type of work group factor, like the level of effort that the group will bring to bear, or maybe the amount of knowledge that they're willing to share, or the skill that they'll apply, or perhaps the appropriateness of selecting specific task performance strategies. And then finally, those three things give you work group effectiveness, which could be a team, right? Could also be just a group of individuals working together in a different manner that's not necessarily a team. So this can actually apply beyond just a team. Could be a different kind of group, maybe a functional group. Now, so when we start talking about some of the things that we had before, right, about what things might apply in work redesign as a manager. So observe for positive and negative objectives, or ensuring stakeholder involvement, or designing good prompts for the clarity of the tasks and constraints, and giving appropriate delegation. Well, those three things get done. And then again, we can just see that the job design features is coming in for all of these. All right, so we also have interpersonal process features. So this is more like how the team works together and how the team works with other teams, or groups work with other groups. So in here we have coordinating efforts and fostering commitment. That helps us bring effort to bear. Weighing inputs and sharing knowledge is what helps get knowledge and skill applied. Inventing and implementing performance strategies, in other words, being able to actually figure out what we're going to do, and helps us bring into the appropriate ones for getting the task performance strategies. And again, we have places where, as a manager, I can bring in skills, right? I can take on tasks of observing the space between teams to make sure coordination is actually crossing where that needs to occur. Is that team talking to information security? I know they need to deal with that. If I don't see that happening, maybe I can help them understand that they need to do that. Observing for language and habits that they might have. That might be the way that might be affecting their inputs and how they share knowledge. Or observing for problems and lack of authority. That could be another thing that comes to bear, right? Looking for those problems that they're struggling with, and also where they're perhaps lacking authority and being able to remove them themselves. So all of these come from work redesign. This portion is applying to work groups or teams. So let's talk a little bit about observing the work system. So I like this particular metaphor. I could be a team that's a cluster of trees. I'm busy, working with the other trees in my group. I can't see the other clusters of trees just because I'm too busy being inwardly focused. As a manager, I'm the one that can see all the clusters of trees, including the clusters that may be 2 or 3 clusters away that the team may need to work with. So that's the observation that you want to be able to do. You as a manager are sort of above and being able to see these teams working together. So what are some things to observe? I would invite that these questions are good questions to be trying to answer in your head to figure out things to observe, like what's working between the teams, what's not working, how do they use language? Are they using us and them and I language, for example, or do they do we and us? And how can we include those groups? What relationships are emerging between teams? What gaps in relationships are emerging? What inventory are they creating that might be wasteful, right? Are they building up things that are not going to be used? What has become habitual in the way they do decisions and actions? Those are all things that I want to take a look at. So let's go to another exercise. So I want you to work individually. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. I want you to identify how, in the context of where you are working or coaching, or if you're not currently working because your organization is shut down, maybe where you last worked, how they can go about looking at the space between teams and groups, the language that they're using, the inventory of work, and any cues that might be sitting around, and what their habits might be. So how would you use, if you're the manager, how would you use those observations? Or if you're a coach, how would you coach the managers to use those observations? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on this.
Hey, Paul, can you clarify the space between the teams and other groups? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, the teams have other teams that they work with and other groups they work with, maybe external groups, perhaps customers. There's like a space in between them, right? Their interaction, there might not be interacting with them on a daily basis. Or their actions may be, they can't see the repercussion of their action, for example. I send something that I finished doing to another group, but they don't see exactly what that other group does with it per se. So that might be space.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, that's time. All right, let's go to our chat window. Anybody have an idea that they would want to share about from their work environment, their particular context, and how they would observe, and how would they end up using it? How does someone get information from another team and complete tasks that require other teams? That's a good one. Generally, do they communicate quickly, informally, formally, or escalate items? Yeah, the last one is an interesting one. How often do they escalate, right? So how often are they looking at using things like from the Eisenhower matrix, right? Which do they treat things that are urgent and important, the right way, or do they tend to have urgent go over important, for example? When those things are separated. Listening for handoff language and misconceptions, right? What assumptions are they making, right? So, and then how does someone defend their time and focus in the face? So that's cool. Inventory is used visually, right? So if it's visual in the Kanban system, right? So that might be there. Is it all? I would invite the question: Is all work necessarily visible in the Kanban system? Is stuff being produced sometimes that's inventory that's maybe going somewhere else that's not in the Kanban system for whatever reason, right? Ideally, if you're doing Kanban, it would be there, but maybe it's not. Yeah, asking the team if they agree on observations, that's a good one. Even see if the manager can, if other managers see that. All right, so the next thing we want to talk a little bit about is demonstrating curiosity, because that's sort of a concept that we would like managers to do. So we have them observing the system, and maybe they see something. We don't want them diving in and necessarily rolling up their sleeves and doing that. There are also maybe other ways that we want them to, not just because it's all. One thing to do is invite people to go on a Gemba walk. Gemba in Japanese means the place where work occurs. It comes from a Toyota production system. They used it a lot. Managers don't make decisions up in their offices. If they want to make decisions, they need to go visit the workplace and see what's actually going on in the work. And then they would actually involve the people that are doing the work in those decisions. And there's a whole around that called A3 reporting. We're not going to have time to go into that. But essentially, going out to where the work is occurring and seeing it is what a Gemba walk is all about. This is where you can make some of these observations, right? So again, borrowing from what occurs in the Toyota production system, managers go out, they're observing the work, they're looking for things, but they don't try to correct it. That is the work system that's occurring in front of you. If you start correcting it, then workers might try to hide it from you if that's the way they actually get their job done, right? Maybe the system's flawed, and if that's not what you wanted to see, maybe the system's flawed, and that is where you as a manager can work to try to figure out how can we change the system with the teams that are trying to do the work. We can look for what's adding value and what's subtracting from it, right? Those are things that we can look for. We can ask questions and we can seek to understand. This is where that demonstrating curiosity really gets deep, because now we're going to start interacting. So another thing to do that is we want to build trust and engagement, and we want to show genuine interest. So we're not going to go a lot of detail into this, but I've had some other talks prior that get into humble inquiry. And that is a great way to open conversations and start seeing what's going on by being very open and letting the people sort of say what's on their mind. So if I'm in the workplace doing a Gemba walk, I don't come up and say, well, what's going on here? Because that's sort of a diagnostic question. I'm trying to scope things to a specific thing. I could just ask, hey, anything interesting? How goes it? What's happening? Something simple and open like that. Then their response may or may not lead down the path of something I'm observing. Then I could always invite more discussion by telling me more. And I'd like to do that after they've finished over telling me more about. Because when I do the about piece, I'm already scoping the problem or scoping the issue of what I'm interested in. It's not a problem per se. Maybe it is something I'm interested in. But I might learn more if I just keep it more open for a while. I could also use the word so, maybe I just don't, coming across as I don't really quite get what's important of what you just said, as opposed to so something seems like a problem or so something seems important, because now again, I'm scoping it. So I want to try to keep from scoping it. It's a really hard thing to do. Humble inquiry is a really hard thing to put into practice, because we as humans look to try to, for problems or things that we want to point out, we're looking to be diagnostic. Now, if after I've had a couple of these, 2 or 3 of these humble inquiry type questions, something continues persisting that seems to be a problem or seems to be an issue or something, then I might want to start talking about, like, well, how do you see it? what do you think about it? What options do you think would work? How would you want to solve that? Now I'm letting that diagnostic question guide me. And then, of course, one of the last questions I ever want to ask is, do you see it that way? If I reflect something back, do you see it this way? Unless I'm really trying to confirm something, because that's a yes, no question, very closed, and it will shut down even being a good, even doing good diagnoses. If I start asking lots and lots yes, no questions. So stay very open, narrow it once you start seeing a pattern showing up that you're curious about. And then you can go into a clarifying question to make sure you understand. All right. So let's say we did identify a problem, and maybe the team didn't realize it, or maybe I'm seeing something going on in between teams that I see as a problem that perhaps neither team is seeing that. I want to help resolve those in a proactive manner. I don't want them having Godzilla show up at the shore. I want to handle Godzilla before he gets there. So if we go back to our questions of things that we're looking at, I can look for things like what's not working between teams, or what language sort of comes across as negative, like us versus them type language. Or if there are gaps in relationships where we know relationships should have formed or should be being formed. I can look for inventory that's wasteful. Are they producing extra stuff that's never used by anybody else, including them? And also I can look at the way they're making decisions and actions. Are they doing certain habits? Do they mindlessly do a certain habit of things? Lately I've been seeing teams that quite frequently go to using, story points and doing planning poker as the way of trying to do relative sizing. When it's not really adding any value and it takes them a long time to do it, they haven't challenged that habit to see if they could get something better. Now, that doesn't mean I want to come in and solve the problem for the team for them. I want to involve those team members in that work. If I'm going to affect their work system, I want to involve them, including how they might interact with other teams. It doesn't mean I don't want to involve them. However, I can start proactively bringing that in. They will appreciate the fact that I'm bringing them in, and that I will take some responsibility for getting those problems solved as a manager. I'm going to do some stuff on their behalf. That is where the servant part comes into. And again, I didn't have to say anything about being servant. I just said I need to be proactive. And what manager doesn't like? Another thing, so I want people working in the same direction. And I can do that by creating good problem design. Particularly if I happen to be like a product manager and I've got product owners that maybe report to me. Or I'm a functional manager and I really want to help a certain part of the architecture get a little bit better, right? And I can see that. That can also be handled with good open-ended things. So we want to align on goals. We want to look at what's the minimum valuable set of constraints. I could set constraints all day long, but I really want to only have what I really, really need. So any constraint should have an explainable rationale so the team can understand why it's being set. It should offer some protection. That's why you set constraints, to be sort of like guardrails, but it should allow some creativity in how it's solved. If there's no creativity there, then really I'm micromanaging. I'm not actually providing a alignment and allowing creativity. I'm just micromanaging if there's no ability of doing any kind of creativity. So something to think about, is don't think about things to be avoided, or describe what you want to be avoided as opposed to a don't method. For example, I might come along to a team that maybe I can grant some authority for how much profit we might be able to lose. And I can say, I want you to avoid losing money. We need to be profitable. I don't have to tell them that, if you exceed X expenditures, we're not going to be profitable, although that might be, maybe I want to reveal that number. But what I don't want to do is come along and say, don't exceed X dollars, right? That is a constraint that they have no creativity in. And let me just see. I have something. All right. Can I get a check from you, Salah? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear it fine.
Okay.
I think sometimes it's just like the audio quality is a little bit, comes in and out.
Okay. Cool. All right. I just saw a bunch of chat messages, and Jim had previously told me that sometimes I'm being dropped, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys could still hear me. Cool. All right. So another thing, if I need measurements along the way to understand progress, right? First of all, if I don't know what I want to measure, I probably need to run an experiment to start figuring out what measurements I really need to do, rather than just guessing at measurements and throwing them out there. I need to figure out with the team on how I can create something that is an experiment that I'm willing to throw away, see if it's valuable. And of course, any measurement should trace to the goal that I want to have, because if it doesn't trace to the goal, then there's not going to be any alignment, right? So we're trying to get alignment here. So if having a measurement that doesn't align, then that will not help at all. Once I've decided on this problem that I want my teams to solve, or a team to solve, or a particular group to solve, or maybe even an individual to solve, I need to delineate the appropriate authority to them. So this is where delegation comes into play. So a lot of people, and I know when I got trained in the Navy, that the delegation worked as a binary thing. You either delegate it fully to the person underneath of you, or you retained it entirely for yourself. So all decisions were very binary. And if you haven't seen this from Jürgen Appello, he has this great thing called delegation poker, where he has 7 different levels of delegation, which is everything all the way telling them what you want them to do, perhaps even how you want it to be done, all the way to say, you make the decision, I don't even care to know what it is. So, and all these different things in between. And this is great because I can pick up scenarios and stuff and actually play sort of scenarios ahead of time about how would you want as a manager to make your delegation decision. Is this something that you would want to just advise them on and let them make it? Or is this something you would make the decision, but you're going to take a softer approach and sell them on it, right? And there's no right or wrong answer. And of course, I might, as a manager, choose something very far on the left, like I want to tell or sell them, where I'm making the decision. And over time, get more comfortable with them and start moving over toward agreeing and advising and inquiring. So this can change over time. So it's a beautiful thing to sort of follow this wonderful rainbow of colors that you're going to set up for us with these seven different arrangements of delegation. So let's do a quick little exercise and see how this works for us. You are a manager over a software team. They're getting ready to build a mission critical application. All right. They need to establish their development infrastructure and their target software architecture. So what level of delegation are you comfortable with? So just want you to go ahead and write down the delegation level you're comfortable with. I'm going to give you a couple minutes. If you're able to do that really quickly and your delegation is anything over sell, where you're starting to release some of that decision making with them, even though consult would be where I'm making the decision, but I'm involving them, are there constraints that perhaps I want to start giving them, right? Because I'm not telling them how I want it to be done. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Okay, and that's time. So who would like to just share in chat what they selected? We're not going to have time really to get into all the constraints because that could get pretty detailed. But hopefully I invited you to think of them a little bit. But I'd like to see how did people feel about what they would delegate in that scenario? What level would they go with? So get together, we have an agreement here, so we're both going to jointly make the decision and agree on that. That's cool. So Joey's got down a mixture of delegate and agree. So constrain on long-term decisions and then seek out agreement. Yep. Consult. Yep. Consult. So I'm going to make the decision, but I would definitely want to make sure the team is involved in that case. Any other ones? Anybody have anything different? Yeah, so that's a really good one. So Sheila's pointing out, depending on where they are. So there's a lot of micro decisions under that, right? So maybe they want to involve a new technology that requires new licensing. Maybe we want to take a look at license costs, and that would be something that I would want to make a decision on. Maybe that would be a consultation, but maybe the actual way things may talk might be something that, yeah, they can, advise me on it, whatever they make the decision on. Might be another way of looking at it. Yep. Inquire. Yep. Yeah. Merging and self-organizing teams. Yeah. A reminder there from Daniel. All right. So let's move on. So once you've kind of done this, one thing that I find happens quite often is people forget decisions on how we were going to delegate, and the manager forgets, the team forgets. They forget what levels, they forget the scenarios. They can't compare a scenario that they may be in to a scenario that they had previously. So some folks have come up with an idea within Jurgen's sort of organization called a delegation board, where we actually have things about what the decisions are and what delegation level will be happening. So here's one, for I think this is actually from Jurgen's board, where he's giving an example that vacation days, what they want to take, the manager makes the decision, but they consult office hours. I make the decision of what the office hours if I'm the manager. Tool selection, I let the team just, make that decision, but I want to know what it is, so I'm going to inquire about it. Team membership, that's something that I need a little bit involved. I need to give them some advice. Maybe they're missing something that possibly could potentially miss something that I'm seeing visible from my level. Goal setting is something I sell them on. And then bonuses we come up and agree on. So those are what he had chosen. So those are things, different levels, so that you might choose. And again, making the scenarios realistic and, kind of broad, then allows people to understand maybe some of the micro decisions that might go underneath of it. And then again, as those micro decisions come up, maybe you want to delegate those further. And so then that can become a new scenario. And so if you came up with that, you could say, okay, well, for this particular decision, I just want to inquire about that. I just need to be informed of it. So and then that can become a new thing on the delegation board that becomes visible to everybody. And this also allows a manager to treat one team differently than another, maybe for lots of different reasons. Maybe I have less trust in that team. Maybe they failed to deliver something earlier. Could be that that's more mission critical, so I want a little bit more say in that, or at least a little more understanding of what they're doing. Maybe I never want them to fully delegate, right? Whereas this team over here doesn't have anything really mission critical. I don't care. They can make all of those decisions, and I don't even care to know what they are. So that a bunch of different things, reasons why I may have different delegation boards for different groups and different teams. So just something to think a little bit about. All right, so we're going to go back to an exercise. I want you to think back on all these tasks of delegation, of observing, of showing curiosity, all of those types of things we've been talking about. And I wanted you to take a look at the tasks that were frustrating you that you wrote down earlier and see where you might be able to replace those with new tasks that you've seen. And I want you to specifically try to put them into your work context so that they're valuable to you, right? And see how many options you can get to get rid of the frustrating ones and either reduce or replace them with new ones that are still good management tasks for you to do. And then lastly, identify one or two that excite you. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. Okay, and that's time. All right, so who would like to share an idea that excites them in the chat? And maybe a little explanation of how that handled your frustrations. So looking at Sheila's, so volunteering to give a different perspective, right? So that's something you can definitely do without necessarily coming along and micromanaging. That's a great way of doing that. Sort of like showing new constraints without coming along and say, these are your constraints. So I like that. Designing problems, yep. Trying to improve, yep. Trying to give options, making them more viable. Yeah, so it may be helping them understand a new tool like a pain gain map or something like that. That's excellent. And making experimentation easier. Yeah. Cool. Anyone else? Anybody had anything specific around observation, perhaps? That would be what they might go around and start observing. All right, observing the language. Yep. Yeah, so definitely figure out what language is being used can help you understand how well a team is working or how they view other teams and stuff, and getting a feel for that, you know. And the more you do Gemba walks, the more your presence is not viewed and giving the Hawthorne effect where everything starts changing just because you showed up. Now, that might happen the first few times you do it, but again, if you do that very regularly, teams are going to behave like they normally behave. So, all right, any other ones? Yeah, that's a good question. How can you conduct a Gemba walk in a remote setting? So that's a really good question. It gets tougher, right? So one thing is perhaps just asking to be regularly a part of some of their ceremonies and getting a feel for there. Perhaps also setting some time for just having chats with them, casual chats, maybe a 30-minute casual chat, see what's on their mind, getting a feel. Maybe also follow up with a little bit of one-on-ones, with everybody. Just, again, try to be as open-ended with those questions. Don't try to be diagnostic when you're doing this stuff. If you're observing a ceremony or something like that, leave it as an observation. And maybe even if they come back and ask you, well, what do you think? You just say, I thought you did really good. And, if you want feedback, I'll give it to you. But, otherwise, I didn't see anything that concerns me, right? Only if you let them have to pull it from you. That might be the best thing to do, and make that a regular habit. So if you get invited, show up every time, because it becomes more normal, right? Don't show up sometimes and then not show up at others. Yeah, that's a good one that Sheila just mentioned. One-on-ones, no specific agenda, right? That's kind of like the humble inquiry thing, very open-ended. And I would say having informal chats with the teams, right? You might start off there before you request access to a formal ceremony. So again, remote makes everything more difficult because they can't see things. Oh, I like that, Celeste. Lean coffee sounds like a good way of going. And build some sharing and stuff. See what's on their mind that way. That's pretty easy to do virtually too. All right. So let's do one little thing. I just want you to take a minute, write down something that you will do different after this session, just as your own little reminder. You don't need to share that with anybody. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Just something you might do different. If you're a coach, maybe it's something you might coach differently. If you're a manager, something you might do different. And that's time. So just some references that'll be in the presentation that you can walk away with. These are all the ones that I'm essentially referencing. I think the only one I didn't actually mention was Helping. Both Humble Inquiry and Helping are by Edgar Schein. He also has a book called Humble Leadership. I haven't read that one yet. That might be another one to take a look at. Probably applies a lot of Humble Inquiry principles into leadership. So that would be another one to take a look at. And so if anybody wants to get in touch with me, there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out with questions or anything like that a little bit later. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're not really doing the Slack channel thing. I thought about it, but decided against it. So.
All right. So any comments or questions?
For the folks that are still around, if you want to throw a fist of 5 with 1 to 5, 1 being this was an awful presentation and you'd love to get with me later and give me some feedback and a piece of your mind, or 5 that you liked it a lot, then somebody's favorite Star Trek Next Generation character. Yeah, that's tough. It's either Picard or Data. And I like Geordi as well. Yeah, there's so many good characters in the first one. in the next generation. I also liked been in Cisco and Deep Space Nine a lot as well.
Paul, will you be sharing the slides?
Okay, so let me.
The slides, Paul, are you okay sharing the slides?
Yeah, I'll put them on SlideShare and I'll send you a link, Salah.
Okay, perfect. Well, it looks like we're getting a lot of 4s or 5s.
They're just being nice, I think.
I think it's the end of the day. Everyone is getting tired.
I really liked the delegation poker notion. Paul, this is Melissa. I plan to take that away and really look into it further.
Yeah, Jürgen Appello's blog site, which I think is .nl, NOOP.nl, NL being the Netherlands. I believe you can download it for free if you put in. I personally have printed it up on cardstock. Years ago, I ran that with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration's the managers directly underneath the CIO, and ran scenarios through that. And then I got invited by one of those managers to run it for their next layer down. It was great because they really started getting a feel for what they could do. And that's, the nice thing is there's no right or wrong answer to that. So,
what was that site that you said again?
Noop, N-O-O-P. I don't know what it stands for. .nl. It might be a word in Dutch, for all I know. Jürgen's Dutch. So, thanks, Salah.
Cool. So, yeah, thank you, Paul. Appreciate this presentation. It's really a lot of great ideas, a lot of takeaways, and I'll share the recording on the meetup page once it's downloaded, and hopefully we can do this again at some point. We're
all right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks a lot for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yep.
Have
Thank you.
a good night.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for organizing, Salah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.